You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I'm a hoarder who needed an outlet to talk about this unusual and isolating mental illness. And because my hoarding is secret, I started this podcast to talk about it. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor, I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? So today we have a replay of an old episode that I think you will love, whether you heard it at the time or are coming to it new. It's a chat with Casey Davis, who you may know from Struggle Care, and she is so wise and gentle and compassionate. Have a listen. So I am here with Casey Davis, whose TED Talk, How to Do Laundry When You're Depressed, led to her book, How to Keep House While Drowning. Her sage advice is down to earth and so welcome because she acknowledges and supports those of us who are struggling to get on top of things and stay on top of things with regard to self-care as well as looking after our homes. She is the host of the Struggle Care podcast and she is on TikTok as Domestic Blisters. Casey, how are you?
I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
So glad you were able to come. So I found you initially through TikTok. I have heard you say since then, I watched a talk you did, that the people who've contacted you there saying that they struggle with the similar tasks as you were struggling with are in the hundreds of thousands. How does such a huge number of people struggling with daily living go unnoticed by most of the world?
Well, the other thing that I hear often is people will comment on a video or a talk and they'll say, this is so life-changing to me. This has helped me. And they'll say it in the same breath as also saying, why has my therapist never brought this up? Or they'll make the comment like, this just did more in 30 seconds than my therapy has done in 6 months. I never talk about this with my therapist. And so there's sort of that data point of, it seems like a lot of people don't reach out to talk to people about what they're struggling with. And I think the reason for that is because whether it's the UK or the USA, like we really have this belief system that if somebody is struggling with care tasks, it must be a character issue or a maturity issue or a responsibility issue. We kind of have that pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. And that's one of those areas when you talk about domestic work that has historically been women's work, that has historically been the work of oppressed and marginalized communities that are either enslaved or exploited. We really like to attach morality to this idea of being good at care tasks, being enough at care tasks. And we love to just, I think in general, the worst of us want to believe that the misfortunes people are struggling with could never happen to us because of something within our control. And we want to believe that we don't have to spend money on people that are struggling because they're struggling for their own fault. There's just a lot of sort of classism and racism and sexism balled up into this. But it comes down to the idea that everyone, including those of us who are struggling, have assumed for so long, well, this is just me. I'm just a screw up. And so I either need to hide it and not tell anybody about it so that I don't get rejected and I'm not loved and I'm not in community anymore, or I have to have some really, legitimate in the eyes of society reason for this struggle before I can ask for help and deserve help.
So before we go further, just a quick clarification. You talk about care tasks. Can you describe what you mean by care tasks?
Yeah. So my book is called How to Keep House While Drowning because I think the term keep house is like the largest grouping of what we would call care tasks. So cleaning, tidying, organizing, doing your dishes, doing your laundry. But care task refers to really any task and they're almost always domestic tasks, that is caring for yourself. So it also includes things like taking your medication, maybe calling the doctor, movement, cooking for yourself, feeding yourself, getting enough sleep. Like it's all of those sort of care tasks. It also envelops caretaking tasks. So tasks that you have to do to take care of children or to take care of other adults in your care that depend on you. And so whether it's changing bed sheets or getting them dressed or bathing them, like bathing yourself, your own hygiene, those are care tasks.
Something you've said that really struck me was shame is the enemy of functioning. And I talk on this podcast a lot about shame and stigma around hoarding. There is a lot of it. People think a lot of terrible things about hoarders. And so it really struck me, whether you're talking about hoarding or whether you're talking about somebody with mild clutter or any kind of functioning issues, we feel and take on this shame, but you're absolutely right. It's the enemy of actually getting anything done.
Yeah, when you're thinking about the motivation to do something, whether it's something small or the motivation to kind of take on some bigger issue in your life and to reach out and get help for it and to be vulnerable with it. I mean, reaching out for help takes a lot of vulnerability. Working on an issue that is really impairing your functioning takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a lot of work, but a lot of cognitive load, a lot of emotional work. I mean, it's just a lot of very vulnerable work, right? And shame at its core is the feeling of disgust turned inward. And I don't know how many of y'all saw the Disney Pixar movie Inside Out.
Yeah.
With the little girl, and she had the little like feelings in her head. And they actually say something kind of profound. They talk about the feelings in the beginning and sort of what purpose they serve, right? So Joy's going down the line and she says, that's fear. His job is to keep Riley safe, right? Because if you're afraid of jumping in a pool with crocodiles, you probably won't do it and you'll stay safe. And, this is anger. He makes sure that justice is served because he's angry at things that aren't fair. And she gets to disgust and she says, this is disgust. She makes sure that we don't eat anything that could hurt us or be around anyone socially that could hurt us. And so it's this idea that things that could make us sick, things that could make us ostracized, that we feel disgust. And I like that they made that connection because I've been saying that for a while, that like most of humanity has sort of an innate disgust towards things like vomit and feces and put, like things that like would make you sick, right? There's a reason as animals we're supposed to go, get me away. And then there's also some social reasons, right? Like this disgust that we may feel against frailty or against someone who's already ostracized, right? Like we have to stay in the pack because pack is survival. And then we have things that are sort of socially given to us, that we're taught to disgust certain things. And if you think about the point of the feeling of disgust, it's both like an emotion and a sense. It is to get yourself away from things that might harm you or hurt you or impact you negatively. But if you're the thing you feel disgust at, you cannot get away from yourself. And it creates this space where I am so disgusted at who I am and what I am. And I just want to get away from it. I want to put so much separation between me and this thing that is sort of a threat to my existence and my worthiness. But you can't. And you get locked in this like snake eating its own tail and you just drown in isolation and self-loathing. And I don't know about you, but that's not like a super motivating environment.
It doesn't do it for me. I'll be honest. It doesn't do it for me. I can imagine people listening thinking, well, sure, other people shouldn't judge themselves or be disgusted by themselves, but I literally live in squalor, or I literally, can't walk across a room because of so much stuff. So surely I should feel shame, even if all those other people that Casey's talking about shouldn't.
Yeah, we often feel the skill of empathy and compassion is much easier applied towards other people than it is towards ourselves. And some of that is, when we have been hiding ourselves from others for so long, even when people try to love us, there is this internal narrative of, oh, well, thank you, but if you only knew. Like it doesn't penetrate your heart. It doesn't warm you. It doesn't make you feel better about yourself, because there's no depth or meaning to someone who loves you because you feel as though they don't know you. They just know this facade, or they just know who you're pretending to be. If they really knew you, they wouldn't love you. And so their love is very impotent, and that's not their fault, right? It's just how it is. And so we do have this sense of, well, I know that applies to them, but if really, 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 if you saw me, if you knew me, if you were inside my house, if you saw the things that I had done, if you've seen that, like, you wouldn't apply that to me. So I think part of it is that. I also think that, those of us living in cultures that are very influenced by sort of like Judeo-Christian beliefs, and really more heavily on the Christian beliefs, is this idea that badness needs to be atoned for in order to be good again, in order to be forgiven again. And we have a very punitive society, right? Like, this person, because they've done wrong, it's not just, we need to put them in a place so that they can't harm others until they're better, or we need to control the harm that they can put on society. There's this very real, no, I want this person to suffer for the harm that they have. And I totally get that. Like, if I, and I'm not saying that that's wrong or bad or to shame anyone who's been a victim, but I think sometimes that sense that we put out there, we inadvertently are laboring under the same type of oppressive thought of, I can't be worthy, I can't be good enough, I can't be loved until I have punished myself for the things. And it's a perverted attempt to be good enough to be loved. Right? So you're saying to someone, I know that you hate me, but don't hate me, because I also hate me. I hate me too. I hate me so bad, I will punish myself day in and day out. And it's this weird way of asserting, see, I do value the good things. I am a good person because I hate things that should be hated, and I should be hated, so I hate myself. And it's like, we're trying to like atone for how bad we are, or how disgusting we are, how lazy we are, by hating ourselves, in the hopes that society will take that penance, or our own minds will take that penance, and we'll know some peace. And it just never worked for me.
And I think we can also be tricked by the very rare occasions when shame is very temporarily motivating. I had a friend who found a lot of maggots in her kitchen, and she was disgusted with herself and disgusted with the maggots, and it powered her for the next half hour to sort that bit of the kitchen out. And so that kind of thing might make us think, see, that's what I need. I need to be disgusted to power myself. But I think in anything other than very short term, and it's not guaranteed in every short term situation at all, but I think it can trick us into thinking that's what we need when it's actually the opposite of what we need.
I mean, you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, I used to work in addiction, and for a long time, and still, like, a lot of addiction facilities here in the States, there's this idea that, if you can feel enough shame about who you are and what you've done and the way you've been living, you will have the motivation to change it. And that even moves into care tasks, right? Like, someone's not showering and it's like, you smell, you this, you that. And we really think like if they could feel shame about it. And in my experience, so I went to drug rehab when I was 16. I was there for a year and a half, and I was put under really heavy, like, structure. And like, every day you wake up, you have these chores, and those chores get checked, and you had to take a shower every day, and you had to brush your hair every day, or you got in trouble. And we had groups where we would confront each other about things we were doing wrong. And it really was this idea that if we could exert enough social pressure on you, you will change. But both my own experience and experience of these places that I've worked at is that, like, you can make someone clean their kitchen. You can make someone shower every day. You can make someone change their behavior while they're under the microscope of that threat of, whatever it is. And so in my case, it was like literal threat, like people literally saying like, yeah. But there's also just like this audience in our heads, right? Like when we find the maggots in our sink, we're not thinking, oh my God, this isn't good for me. Oh my God, this isn't, I really am someone who deserves clean dishes. I don't deserve to have someone with maggots. And gosh, I really need to do something different because this isn't what I want for myself. Like it's never like self-focused. It's always like, oh my God, I'm such a disgusting piece of shit. And I better do anything I can to not be a disgusting piece of shit before the world finds out. Right.
Yeah.
And so even when we're in private, it's the audience in our head. Right. And in my experience, we would watch these young men and women leave these facilities and they don't keep doing the things that they were doing in the facility.
Yeah.
Because that motivation, when it comes from this external social pressure, at the end of the day, we're just alone. And if I'm looking at my dishes and going, I really want to get in bed, or I really hate doing dishes, or I'm really struggling with the executive functioning it takes to do these dishes. Sometimes I might go, oh, but you'll hate yourself if you don't do them. But for the most part, I'm by myself choosing between two impossible choices in a really difficult scenario. But you're right, the social pressure only pushes someone so far. It doesn't create long-term motivation. I mean, this in the whole joke about how everybody signs up for the gym in January, right? And then they're all gone by March. This idea that this like total habit makeover is going to happen. Particularly, what I see is that that's born out of someone being disgusted with themselves. That's it. No more excuses. I'm going to do right? But I mean, it just doesn't work.
And when something's enforced, if you have a personality like me, the moment it's not enforced, you go, haha, I don't need to do that anymore, and rebel against it.
Yeah. So many people I know that had parents that were like overly punitive around care tasks. Maybe they kept their home like a museum and you got in trouble for just playing on the floor, and you couldn't go play until you did XYZ. A lot of people come out of those environments and then don't do anything for themselves because it's almost like this assertion of autonomy and agency. It's like, I'm finally out from under that and I'm not going to do that. You can't make me.
Yeah, 100%. I read your book a while ago and I have been rereading it over the last few weeks. I like, first of all, that it's really accessible. It's not like a big tome with chapters that go on and on and on. It's quite bite-sized and it's quite actionable as well. But I like that you're not saying to people, your system should be ABC. This is how you do the kitchen. This is how you do the bathroom. It's not that at all. It's more about encouraging us to work out our own systems and kind of shaking off this need to necessarily do things in a conventional way. If you find a way that's different, but it works, go for it. Can you talk a bit about that kind of approach?
Yeah, I find that the self-help space is really taken up with a lot of like one size fits all methods, a lot of sort of fix you quick methods, a lot of sort of exploitive marketing about like, have you ever had this big problem? I'll solve it forever. Buy this book. Yeah. But the reality is like there are so many different kinds of people that are looking for help with care tasks. And so there just doesn't exist a system that will work for every single barrier that exists, right? Like someone who's struggling with hoarding is not going to need the same system as the mother of 3 who, really can't sit down because she's too, overworked and exhausted. Won't work for the person that is ADHD and keeps forgetting everything. Won't work for the person who's too depressed to get out of bed. Won't work for the woman who has recently left a marriage and, lost a parent and doesn't have any social support. Like, you just can't write a system. So much of what we are able to do is based on the unique nuances of our privileges and our marginalizations and our access to support and our own internal and exterior barriers, right? And so I knew that there couldn't be a method or a system that could universally apply or help everyone. But what I did also know is that so many of us are stuck in this idea of care tasks being a moral obligation and of our struggle with them being this moral indictment on ourselves, that when we come to something we can't do or something we struggle with, when it's an issue of, I must just not be trying hard enough, like we get to that bottleneck, right? Like for me, it was like doing laundry and I'm staring at the laundry and I'm never folding it. I'm never putting it away. I'm always overwhelmed by it. I'm stepping over it every day and I'm just staring at it. And I know how laundry is supposed to be done. And I know I should do it that way. And I keep having trouble getting it done that way. But because the issue is that I'm just not trying hard enough, I get stuck in this like tunnel vision of like, here are the rules. They must be done that way. And I guess the only thing I have to do is like push myself harder. When someone, I think, enters that space and teaches us self-compassion and teaches us the moral neutrality of all these tasks, and teaches us to shift our perspective from performing for acceptability and believing that we're a person that deserves to function, all of a sudden that opens up an individual person's ability to be creative, to understand their own needs, and to make the changes and accommodations in their own life that work for them. Like, I don't need to do that for you. You can do that for yourself. But sometimes we just need a little help to sort through, the belief systems that might be blocking us from doing that. Like believing that people know their barriers best and can be extremely creative when it comes to moving around those barriers if you just give them permission to do so.
I had a couple of years ago, I made a rule for myself. I make a lot of rules for myself. I made a new rule for myself where if I was eating in anywhere other than my kitchen, I had to use disposable cutlery because I was losing cutlery. I don't know where it goes, but I couldn't find it. So I just thought, okay, the cutlery never leaves the kitchen. So I used like bamboo cutlery to try and minimize, rather than plastic. But then that combined with a hatred of doing dishes. And so I started also sometimes using paper plates. And I was quite full of shame about that. Like, I'm a grown adult. I should be able to use cutlery and proper plates. But I did it for a while. And through that time, I started kind of creating my own solutions to the original problem, which was, okay, maybe if there's a specific place for used cutlery to go in that room, then I know where it is. And so I won't lose it all. And so I gradually started switching to occasional metal cutlery, and then it worked. And I thought, okay, that's great. So I have a little cutlery pot now that cutlery goes in. And then I was having a meal off not a proper plate, a ceramic plate. All plates are proper plates. I was having a meal off a ceramic plate, and I thought, oh, this is such a treat. And then I thought, I deserve more treats. And when I started looking at eating off ceramic plates again as something I could do for myself as a positive, my brain immediately got more creative about coming up with ways I could work that, rather than previously where I had been, you're such a loser, you're eating off paper plates. What's your life come to? And those shifts in thinking, first of all, I need my own solution. And secondly, it's really nice to eat off a ceramic plate. Well, what got me to a place now where 90% of what I eat is with metal cutlery and ceramic plates.
That's the exact process that I experienced as well. And it's the exact process that I'm hearing other people experience, is that for many people, when they give themselves permission to just give themselves the accommodation and not as a stepping stone anywhere, just as a like, I deserve to eat, I deserve to not have bugs, they find that after a little while, they start to get a little curious. They start to toy with it. And it ends up kind of being this, and now I'm back to, ceramic plates. And I think the reason that happens is because, the idea of using paper plates is not given like, okay, and now we're going to habit stack, right? Like it's not this like, we're going to get you to some end goal. We're going to get you to the finish line, because the reality is there might be people who start with paper plates and that's what they use for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But it's like, you have to give yourself that full permission of like, I deserve to function. And the reality is it's been how many years of trying to function with my ceramic plates and it's not working. And so I'm going to have to do this so that I can have the energy and the capacity to work on some other things in my life to increase my quality of life, because I'm a person that deserves that. And for so many of us, we end up being so curious about these little moments and having these genuine moments of, because here's the thing, you never could have had that moment of, ooh, this is such a treat, if the moment you were having was, okay, good, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Because there is this like pleasure that we derive out of, see, I'm acceptable. See, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. Ooh, look, I'm a person that eats up. Like there is that sort of layer. But until we sort of get that aspect out of the picture, we never have that organic moment of, this is quite nice. And boom, there's the sustainable motivation.
Yeah. Something that a lot of people who hoard have in common is, one of the reasons a lot of people hold on to things is a need to be thrifty or to save the planet. If I throw this away, it will go in landfill and I can't have that, so I will keep it. Or if I throw this away, it might end up in the sea, killing octopuses, and we can't have that. So I'll keep it in my house and it will be safe. And with that in mind, I wondered if you could talk a bit about that permission to sometimes do things like use disposables when there are non-disposables available.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of bigger pictures that I like to take, it's one thing if it's like, hey, this is something that I'm using, right? So you're looking at your computer and it works just fine. Great. Yeah. So it is true that if you throw that computer out and you get another computer, like there's one more computer in the landfill, right? However, a lot of us have things around that we're not using. We're not using them. We just feel like, oh, but if I get rid of it. And sometimes I like to fast forward and think about like, how long has the world been around? How long will it be around? And in that time frame, like my lifespan is such a blip. And the truth is, like, one day I will die and this shit will go to a landfill. Like housing it temporarily in your house for 25 years doesn't prevent it from going to a landfill.
Something I said on an episode ages ago was, the question is, does it go to landfill now or does it go to landfill in 20 yeyears? It's not whether it will go to, and I get emails still saying that point has changed my life.
Exactly. And the thing, and even more than that, the question is, will it go to a landfill while I live a functional and joyful life? Or will it go to a landfill while I live a life where I'm not functioning and I feel guilty and I am, living under this burden? It's like this thing, like the destiny of this item is the same, but the destiny of you is not in either of those scenarios.
That's an amazing point. I love that. I love that. Do you want to be a dehoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk dehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a Dehoarding Darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. Tell us about your 5 things theory, which is great.
So I have ADHD. I have a lot of issues with executive functioning with this, which is that front part of your brain that does a lot of interesting things. And part of what happens for me is that because I'm a pretty messy person and I've got kids. And so all of a sudden I'm looking at, you turn around and you're looking and you're going, oh God, there are 1,000 things in this room and it's not functional and I need to pick it all up. And I find that there are these moments of resistance where I'm going, oh, I hate this. And one of the things that I really hated was I would pick up an item and then I had to look at the item and think about what the item was and think about where it went. And I had to go to another room and put that item away. And in the meantime, I would get distracted by something since I'm going to the other room. And then I'd pick up an item and I would look at the item and I have to think about where that item goes. And then, a lot of this stuff doesn't have a place to go. So then I'd have to think about where should it go? Well, I guess it should go in the pantry. And I go to the pantry and I go, oh, well, there's no place for it here. And this is all disorganized. So I guess I should organize my pantry. So I can pull everything out of my pantry. And now I'm putting things in my pantry. And then suddenly somewhere, whether it's 30 minutes or 3 hours into it, I immediately lose motivation and steam. And I look around and I've made no progress. Or I've made very little progress.
Or you've made it worse.
Or I've made it worse, right? And so I feel so unmotivated and so defeated. And so if that's my experience in tidying up, of course I don't want to do it. So early on, literally in my 20s, I sort of realized that there were some ways to get around those internal resistances and barriers. And one of them was looking at this kind of sea of items and thinking to myself, okay, it looks like there are 100 things in this room, but really there are only 5 types of things. There's trash, dishes, laundry, things that have a place, and things that do not have a place. And I would get a trash bag and I would go around and I would pick up all of my trash and put it in that trash bag. And then I would tie off the trash bag and just leave it there in the room, go around, get all of my dishes, put them in the sink and leave them there, go around, get all of the laundry and the shoes in a basket, set them to the side, and then sort of pick an area and move clockwise or counterclockwise, putting away all of the items that have a space, and then making a little pile of the things that don't have a space. And so in that way, there's multiple little finish lines for my brain to go, ooh, done, moving on. It gets the space more livable much quicker. And so there's this reward that your brain is experiencing that feels very motivating. So, okay, now I'm going to throw the trash out. Now I'm going to put the laundry in. Now I can do the dishes. Sometimes, I hate doing dishes so much that there's sort of this theory that do the worst thing first and then you feel motivated. And that works for some things. That does not work for me with dishes.
The same. Just means you never start.
Yeah, I'll just never start. I will only clean my house if I allow myself to do dishes last. And then the whole house gets clean. But so, it helps with that. There's no decision paralysis. It's just trash, 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 trash. That's what's happening in my brain right as I'm walking. And it also helps me because I can, if I take that way of sort of organizing it for my brain, and then I bring in a few other a little accommodations. So I bought myself some wireless earbuds so that I could listen to a podcast that I really like or an audiobook, right? So now I've taken away the this is so boring aspect of it. And then I also got myself a grabber. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where you can grab things up high?
Yeah.
I love them because I can now walk around and not have to bend over and over and over to pick the things up off the ground. And so I just sort of slowly gave myself permission to add in or take away any steps or accommodations to that ritual that made it easier, that made me less likely to avoid it. And now it's much easier. And I think of it as resetting my space. So the space isn't functional. No big deal. That's what spaces do. We live in them and they slowly become less easy to live in. And then we reset the space so that it's livable again.
And depending on somebody's situation, they might do all of that, but just with a chair. or with
Mm-hmm.
a square meter. It doesn't have to be do the whole room, does it?
No, it doesn't. And it doesn't matter how long that takes. Maybe you spend 10 minutes a day and you just 10 minutes of picking up trash. And then the next day is 10 minutes of picking up, and you just do that until all the trash is gone. Then you move on to the next category. Or maybe you're someone who wants to do 5 minutes per category every day. Or like you can do literally any. I get so many questions about, could I do it if I only did? And it's like, the answer is yes, literally whatever you're going to say, like whatever works for you, whatever makes it easier for you. If you want to wheel around on a wheelie stool while you do it, if you want to set a timer and race yourself, if you want to put cookies in the oven and go, okay, in 15 minutes, I get cookies. In the meantime, I'm going to go see what I can pick up. Like anything you can add to that will be it's okay.
And the good thing about that kind of approach as well is that it answers, where do I start? Which is the hugest question, especially if you have a whole home that is hoarded or that is out of action or out of control. It's a really hard question, but if the answer to the question is pick a spot and get rid of the trash, then that's answered where to start.
Mm-hmm. And when you come across something and you think to yourself, should I throw this away or not? Like, it's okay to put that to the side and come back to it. Like, you don't want to you want as many automatic decisions and movements to kind of flow. So getting all of what your brain can comfortably say, trash, 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 and then come back. It's kind of like when you're trying on clothes in a fitting room, most of us will go, okay, that's the maybe pile. And this is the yes pile. And this is the definitely no pile. Like, it's okay to have your maybe pile, save it for afterwards, and then come back and ask yourself, okay, and come up with your own questions. Like, I like to ask myself, what in this pile do I use every day? If I use it every day, I take it out. Okay, what in this pile do I use once a week? And I take it out, right? What in this pile do I use reliably a few times a year, right? Because like my cat carrier, probably a few times a year, right? I take it out. And then I look at it. And then I say, is there anything in this pile that, and I sort of like pull that nod from Marie Kondo and go, is there anything in this pile that just makes me really happy? Happy to have, not guilty to get rid of.
Yeah.
Happy to have. And I take it out. And sometimes it's much easier to attack a pile by what do I need and what can I keep versus what should I give away? Right? Because what should I give away is what gets you into the, oh, but it's environmental. Oh, but I could save it. Oh, but I could pass this down to my, oh, I know my neighbor is having a baby and maybe I could fix this up. And so when you get, what do I use daily, weekly, a couple times a year, a few times a year, and what in here makes me really happy, then you have a pile of what are probably the more difficult decisions for yourself, what probably will require you to sort of take on your coping skills, contact your support system, like going through that. But in the meantime, there's so much you can do to make your space livable, that is a lot easier than what you would have to sort of draw on to address that pile.
It's good to hear that, because I advocate the same thing. I think you can't get to a place where you're deferring every decision, because then you're just moving a pile from your right to your left.
Yeah.
But if you make the easy decisions first, then by the time you come back to the hard decisions, you've built some skills and you've had practice and you're more used to making the decision. And so the second time round, it's not as hard to make that decision a lot of the time. Whereas if you start straight away with whatever your weakness is, whether it's family photos or books or whatever your particular thing that you really can't make decisions on, you're setting yourself up to fail. Whereas for me, it's always obvious trash. That's my place to start, because I personally don't tend to have dilemmas about that. That's quite easy for me. And it gets me in the mindset. And after a while of doing that, I'm more equipped to make slightly harder decisions.
Yeah, sometimes, motivation creates motivation. And so when you feel like you've had lots of wins, it's a lot easier to enter into those harder ones. And I will say, for people that tend to really struggle with, okay, I know I don't need this and I don't really want it, but I can't bring myself to throw it away. Especially, when you mentioned like family photographs, it's like, how many generations back, do you really need every photograph that's ever been taken? But one of the things that I have done in the past that's been really helpful for me for meaningful items that I don't have room for, is asking a friend to come over and setting aside time to talk about that item with them and what that item represents and what that item meant. And, talking to them about the importance of that item. And then that friend will take that item with them when they leave. And even though I know that like my best friend is not going to keep the love letters from the first love that I ever had, like I know she's not going to keep those things,
Yeah.
but like it couldn't be me to put them in the trash.
Yeah.
It felt too much like a violation of that relationship. Or so it's like I needed this like third option of like, can it just disappear? Can it lovingly and with honor disappear from my home? And so even though I knew what was going to happen, I was able to honor the item, give her the items. And then she said, I will take care of these. And she left. And somehow that sort of like worked for my head, for my brain.
I love that. And also, if you have a chat with her about the things, you're creating new memories around them that will stick around in a more meaningful way than having the thing in a drawer.
Yeah. And recognizing that for a lot of memories and relationships, when you have an item that represents that, that item can bring to you memories and positive associations and reminders of that relationship. But if that item then becomes something that is impeding your functioning, it begins to taint the memory. It begins to take away from the goodness that was that thing. And I think thinking of it in that way of like, we're not betraying anyone by getting rid of this thing. We're actually honoring them. Because like you said, we're creating this memory and we're sort of detaching the memory from the item, because at this point, like the item is going to begin to degrade the memory, right? Every time you say, oh, I can't now. It's like now, instead of seeing this lovely vase, instead of having warm feelings about it, I'm just seeing it and feeling guilt. And does that really honor my late mother? You know what I mean? Like, does that really, or am I just feeling this guilt every time I see it because it's not put up somewhere, it's not clean. I feel too guilty to get rid of it. And so I think sometimes exploring those types of things of, this, the real gift was in the relationship, not the mementos.
Yeah, because however beautiful a box is, if you trip over it twice a day, you're not going to feel good things about it, are you?
Mm-hmm. Or if you never see it again, if you have to kind of put it in some really elaborate storage where you're never going to see it or get to it, we can't. It's got to breathe.
A phrase I learnt from you is task initiation. And this is definitely something that I and a lot of hoarders struggle with. When you just can't get moving, you can't get started, and you should, and you might even want to, but you just can't. What are some solutions you've found with that particular issue?
So it's important for us to understand the difference between motivation and task initiation, because we tend to default to going, oh, I'm just not motivated. But motivation has to do with your desire to do something and your recognition of the importance of it. So there are absolutely people that are maybe so depressed that they're going, well, I don't see the point in cleaning myself. I don't deserve it. That's motivation, right? Or the kid that goes, I don't care about how I do in school. That's motivation. But if you're going, I wish this was different. I understand why laundry is important. I would really like to be wearing clean clothes. I would really like to be able to walk in my closet and know where my things are and not feel overwhelmed. Like, congratulations, you're motivated. But oftentimes we can have that motivation and still find ourselves like sitting on the couch going, I need to do laundry. I need to do laundry. Get up and do laundry. I've got to do laundry today. And we just can't seem to make our brain like initiate movement in our bodies.
Yeah.
And it's really this issue with transitions, right? Like the transition from sitting on the couch to getting up and doing laundry feels like pushing a boulder up a hill. It feels like we have to rally every ounce of sort of mental strength and physical strength and like to make ourselves get going. And so there's a few things that can be helpful with that. For me, when I started my ADHD medication, because task initiation is a really big issue with a lot of people with ADHD, I was amazed at how easy it was for me to go, I should do laundry, and then to get up off the couch. It was like someone had greased the wheels. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was amazed. So don't discount medication if that's something that would work for you. But there are also kind of little hacks that we can use. Like for me, the transition from standing up from the couch, like sitting down comfortably, to doing laundry was just too big. So I had to find a transition that didn't feel burdensome. So it was like, okay, one of my favorites is like I would put on a song and it was like, okay, but I can dance with my feet. Like I can move my feet while I'm sitting. And then once I'm doing that, maybe I dance in my chair. And then once I'm doing that, maybe I stand up to dance and I just move my body and then I just stand there. And then maybe I can just stand. And then there's not as big of a transition between standing by my chair and standing in my laundry room. It's still just standing. I can walk a few feet and then just standing there and it's kind of this idea of moving towards in these, like just making small little steps and decisions to move towards without the expectation that you have to do anything once you get there. And then, what if I gave myself permission to put 2 things into the laundry, just 2 things. And so there's kind of some ways like that you can do it. You can also, bundle them with something fun. So for me, when I talk about like the audiobook or the podcasts, I actually have a podcast that I love to listen to that I only listen to when I'm doing care tasks. And so I almost find myself being like, what can I do around the house so that I can like listen to the next episode?
I get emails from people who do that with this podcast.
Yeah.
I only allow myself to turn it on when I'm dehoarding. And so, yeah, and I want to listen. So
And body doubling is another really great one. A lot of us will say, why is it that like, if someone's over at my house, I can do things while I'm talking to them, but I can't do it, when they're not there. And it's a real tactic. It's called body doubling. Sometimes it's easier, even if that person is not helping you do anything. Even like I have a friend and we just go over to each other's houses and one of us sits at the bar and drinks coffee while the other one does the dishes, right? Like even if they're not doing anything, and you can do that same thing with a phone call or a FaceTime, right? You can call someone and talk to them on the phone while you're doing something. I think sometimes we think about care tasks being boring and we go, well, I don't want to do it because it's boring. There's kind of this voice that's like, what is your problem? You're an adult. Adults have to do boring things. But like, okay, but if there's an easy way to make it not boring, like it's not like do that. Like there's no big deal. It's okay that you don't want to do it because it's boring. And if the easier solution is to find something that's not boring over just berate yourself about not being an adult until you make yourself do the boring thing. It's like the easier thing to do there is just find a way to not make it as boring or not make it as painful or not make it take so much effort. I recently bought a garage wheelie stool. Let me tell you, this thing is changing my life. I have 2 children. They are 3 and 5. They're about 3 feet tall. They still need a little bit of help getting dressed. And this is embarrassing, but like the amount of times that like I have sort of like walked to the laundry room going, I'm going to have to get in there and I'm going to have to bend over a bunch of times and I have to sit on the ground to be at a right height to like help them. And then as soon as I sit down, one of them will run away from me and I'll have to get back up. And it's like, this sucks. And so I bought myself a little wheelie stool. And so I go in there and I sit on my wheelie stool so I'm the right height to help them. And if I need to get something, I can wheel over and grab this shirt. I could wheel over and grab this little diaper. And I could wheel over and do this. And if they run, I could wheel forward and grab them real quick, or I can get them a little step stool so they step up and they're the same height. And yeah, like if my life depended on it and rolly stools didn't exist, sure, I could just make myself get over it and, bend down a bunch of times. But they do exist and I am allowed to do that. So why wouldn't I?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think it was a TikTok video where two women were talking about using HRT for menopause and how they had both resisted it, feeling like they should be able to get through this without. And then they started taking it, and it absolutely changed their lives in a really positive way. But they would hear people say, well, women have got through the menopause for hundreds of years without HRT. And they say, well, yeah, and they were as miserable as we were.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing worthy about being miserable for the sake of it. And similarly, there's nothing worthy about doing a boring thing in a boring way when you could do it in a more interesting way.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's no virtue in doing something the harder way unless it changes the outcome to a more virtuous outcome, right? Like, yes, I am going to do all of the really hard work to not yell at my children because the outcome of not yelling at my children is very different than just yelling at my children, right? But the outcome of me like sorting laundry on a stool versus not, like doesn't change the outcome. Um, and unless you enjoy the harder way. Like if you love to run marathons, good on you,
Yeah.
right? Like my mother loves ironing. Great. Nothing wrong with that. But enjoying something that is more steps or more energy is not necessarily virtuous.
What you said as well about when you were struggling with task initiation to make it lots of tiny steps rather than going straight for the big thing.
Yes.
Something that came to mind that I've been doing, and like you said, your stool is helping you embarrassingly much. This step is embarrassing in how much it's helping me. What it is when I fill a rubbish bag and it's ready to go out, I typically put it behind the front door so that when I go out, it's there ready. And what I've started doing a lot of the time when the rubbish bag is full and ready to go, instead of putting it behind the front door, I think, well, I'll just open the front door and put it 1 foot further away so it's outside the front door instead of behind it. And what always happens is once I've got the front door open and the bag in my hand, I think, well, I may as well take it all the way out now I'm here.
Yeah.
And I know that's what's going to happen. But I still say to myself, no, all you have to do is take it, just open the door. It's only one tiny step more than not opening the door. But it nearly always gets me all the way outside. It is embarrassing but amazing also how effective that kind of tiny thing is.
Absolutely.
Something you've talked about as well that again a lot of hoarders talk about is a need to have things in front of them. You need to have everything within view. If I don't keep this electricity bill here, I'll forget to pay it. If I don't put the new book there, I'll forget to read it, which inevitably creates clutter. And in my experience, is not that effective because it's an electricity bill on top of 20 other electricity bills on top of 20 books. And so when I go, oh, I need to pay that electricity bill, I can't find it. And there's so much that it doesn't remind me anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any experience of solutions for that kind of sense that you have to be able to see things?
Yes. So, there are those of us that really need what I refer to as visual storage. But the key is two words. It is visual, but it is storage, right? The idea that I just need to set it right here on my countertop, that's not storage. So I would say, don't be afraid to take the doors off of your cabinets. If you truly need to see everything, don't be afraid to buy yourself a bookstore at the thrift store, right? Like you get yourselves more shelves, get yourself more clear bins, get yourself, when you're looking for organization solutions, keep in mind that they have to be visual for you. But saying I need to be reminded of it, so I'm just going to put it anywhere doesn't work, right? And building in rituals into your day. And so if it's every day when I come home, I sit down at this desk and I look through these papers and I do some actionable items. If you're introducing sort of a ritual of when you're going to come to that place and do something, then it's okay, so this stack can be here. Right? That's a lot easier. Like I started using those like clear hanging like shoe holders
Oh, yeah.
As junk drawers. So instead of chucking things into drawers, like that's where they go because now they're all visual. And we all have that maddening little category of things that like there aren't enough things like that thing for it to truly get organized somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I would use those for. I'd put them on the back of doors. I would hammer them into the walls
I love that.
because that is where I can still see everything. And I have quite a bit of things in my house where we just don't put things behind doors. I have this really long credenza. There's nothing in it because I just know once things start going behind doors, I forget that they are there. But I do suggest things like taking the doors off of things, having a room in your house that you can put in more storage that keeps it visible. And having spaces like I used to have I would tell myself like, I'm going to clear the island every night. So, but then I'd have other spaces where it was like, I never ever care what this looks like. I have a little hutch in my kitchen where it's like, this is the drop zone. But I am going to take the effort to sort of anything that's on the countertop will get looked at, done something with, taken away, thrown away, because I do need to have an accessible space to cook food, to do a hobby, to do these sort of things. And so I think sometimes we get very black and white about like new rule, nothing on the countertops. And it should be like new rule in this 4 foot by 4 foot section of the countertop, nothing here.
And again, that's about setting your priorities based on how you like to live rather than because everybody says you must have a clear countertop. If you don't care whether your countertop's clear, don't prioritize that.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about that feels revolutionary when you say it, and it shouldn't, but it does, is that rest is a right and not a reward. Why are we in a society where we feel guilty for resting? I know that's a massive question, but how did we get here?
Classism. I mean, if you look at someone who is struggling to pay their bills and they're taking a day off to rest, it's sort of like, lazy. If you look at someone who never works because they have generational wealth, no one ever calls that person lazy.
Yeah.
Even if they don't do anything all day long. Like it really is specifically about going back to this idea that, if you are in misfortune, it is your fault. There's something that can be pointed to. You didn't work hard enough. You weren't dedicated enough. You weren't responsible enough. You weren't smart enough, as if, smarts is something most of us can control anyways, right? And so you start to look at like, what kind of judgments do we put on people that we view as being in lower classes that don't equally apply to people that we see in upper classes?
Yeah. I'm always fascinated by local newspaper comment sections, which are a terrible place. But what always interests me is if there's a story about somebody who something terrible happened to them, you can almost see people starting to read thinking, do I have sympathy for this person or am I glad this happened to them? And that's judged based on whether they work. It's judged on whether they are white. It is judged on whether they're pretty. It's judged on so many things. And by paragraph 3, people are set that we are glad this bad thing happened to that woman, or isn't it terrible that that bad thing happened to that woman? I think they are a horrible but really enlightening way to see how people see the world with that kind of thinking.
Yeah. And I think some of what that comes from, I think, is what we talked about earlier about like just greed, right? I don't want to have to help other people. So I need to believe that it's their fault that they need help. And some of it, I think, comes from an inability to grapple with sort of the existential anxiety that is living. Like if I hear about a child passing away, the first thing I want to know is how did it happen? And was it the parent's fault? Not because I'm interested in judging that parent, but because as a parent, I almost like I want that to be the case, like that it was the parent's fault, because then I can soothe myself with, okay, well, I would never do that. So my kids are okay. But when I read an article about a child passing away through circumstances nobody could have controlled, circumstances that my child is in every day or could be in, the amount of anxiety that I have about that is uncontrollable. And I don't want to think about the idea that something could happen to my kids. And so I need to grab on. We saw this with COVID, when somebody dies of COVID, well, did they have underlying conditions? This really
Yeah.
ableist take. And what I think was happening for a lot of people was I don't want this to be a thing that could just indiscriminately strike me. I want to believe that there is some way that I can tell myself this misfortune will not happen to me, because I don't have the coping skills to deal with the idea that life is sometimes random and meaningless and bad things could happen to good people.
Years ago, a young man was murdered in my city, and through work, I was involved in the local community there. And I was in a community centre shortly after it happened, and people were coming to find out what was going on. There were police everywhere, what's happening. And I was watching from a distance, and it was fascinating because people would come in and say, "Oh, there's been a murder, young man's been murdered." And the first question was always, was it drug related? This was quite a poor part of the city. There was a big drug issues. But everybody asked it. And then the next person would come in and say, "What's happened? Was it drug related?" And I was sitting there observing it, thinking, why is everybody asking that? And then I realized it's because they can say, if it was drug related, I'm safe because I don't take drugs. And it was really enlightening to just observe that happen. And I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying they're human people who want to feel safe in their community. And if they could segment it in their brain as, oh, drug crime, I'm not involved in drugs, my family's safe.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. It's hard. A lot of what we've talked about, and a lot of what I've seen from your online content and your book, if we know, say, that shame is holding us back, we know that we're not being very kind to ourselves, we know that trying to single-handedly save the earth by collecting every piece of trash you see on the street isn't ideal. How do we start to turn that around in our heads?
Well, I think there's a few sort of ways to start. And one is just to become aware of what you tell yourself when you see mess, of what you tell yourself when you struggle. Just sort of become aware before you even decide to do anything about it. Just become aware of how often those voices come. And then I think sometimes the next step is interesting to go, I wonder whose voice that is. Just get curious. Like, where did that come from? Is that your mother's voice? Is that a boyfriend's voice? Is that your third grade teacher that told you were dumb's voice, right? Like, where does that voice, like, whose voice is that? And then I think we can take steps towards replacing those voices, maybe not even replacing, but allowing those voices to live alongside some self-compassionate voices. And I talk a little bit about what that can look like in my book. So that's kind of like the interior headspace stuff. But I also think that none of this, I think, can be done outside of the context of community. Having at least one relationship where you feel seen and heard, that you can safely be vulnerable, because, there might come a time when you have to ask for help, and the person that you're asking for help does judge you. Most of the time, people aren't thinking about you, but sometimes somebody will come into your home and judge you. And in those moments, when I have to decide, okay, am I willing to let someone judge me in exchange for my home being more livable for me? Like, if that has to be the exchange, like, I have to have someone in my life that I can go to with that can be that voice of, it doesn't matter what that woman says. It doesn't matter what that woman thinks. She's going to leave today and never think of you again. And even if she does, you'll never know about it because you'll never see this person again. And let's do it together.
Amazing. Amazing. So, Casey, if people want to find you online, if they want to read your book, if they want to listen to your podcast, tell us where they can do that.
So the easiest thing is to go to my website, which is strugglecare.com. From there, you can watch the TED Talk. You can order the book. You can look at my shop and get to my podcast and then see what my socials are. I'm at Domestic Blisters on TikTok and at Struggle Care on Facebook and Instagram. And that's also the name of the podcast.
Fantastic. I will put all those links in the show notes. If people are scrabbling for a pen, it will all be on the website. That's all fine. Casey, thank you so much. It's so good to talk to you. And you've just got so many good things to say. I love it.
Thank you so much.
I've been thinking about how many of us have to keep our hoarding secret. I will get to the top tip of the week in a sec, but just for a moment, let's talk secrets. I certainly keep my hoarding secret, and I've been wondering about the effect that these secrets and the shame have on us and our mental health. I'm thinking of doing an episode about the secrets we keep about our hoarding. And if you feel comfortable, I want to hear your hoarding secrets. I've created a form where you can submit your secrets anonymously. I will not know who sends what. If you want to tell me your secret for a potential future episode, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/secret. That's overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/secret. Now back to your top tip. My top tip today is from Renee at the Unstuffed podcast, who has some really good advice about how to deal with those things that you're hanging on to because they used to belong to somebody you've lost. Have a listen.
By keeping these things close to me, I feel as if I'm keeping a part of her with me, even though she's left this earth. And if you have lost someone you love, I know you relate to this on some level. This part of decluttering stuff can be very real, a very, very real, true grieving process, as it can very much feel as if we are losing that person all over again. And if this is something that you struggle with, here's one thing that has helped to remind me that it's okay to let go of this item. Our stuff isn't our lost loved one. Their life, their soul was way, way, way bigger than any man-made item could ever be. Pictures are not them. Items they made aren't them. Their favorite things don't have to be our favorite things. This was something I profoundly had to realize and say to myself over and over again when I would feel guilt around letting go of course, my grandmother's things. I don't remember struggling with even my dad, which sounds so unfortunate. And I don't really know why that is, but for some reason, my grandmother's stuff is a struggle for me. Now, while I very much believe that hanging on to a few items of a lost loved one can be incredibly healing, I also believe slowly detaching from these items can be very therapeutic and freeing. And I'm not here to cast judgment. I've got my mother-in-law talks about how she loves having her mom's couch in her living room. She removed her couches and put in her mom's couches because I think she probably feels like she remembers sitting on those couches with her mom, right? But where it would become a problem was if she took her mom's couch and stored it in her garage or in another room in her house. And it started to take up this space and it started to become more of a burden rather than a thing of healing. So this doesn't ever mean that you have to rush the process or give yourself a deadline. Definitely not. It just means that if you find yourself clinging to items or an item for no other reason than the fact that it belonged to someone of significance, it's okay to let it go.
I know that that's a really difficult category of items for a lot of us, and so hopefully that will have given you a bit of food for thought. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast.